Hi, it's Laurie from Astrolore. Welcome today. Um, I know that you're here because you want to learn astrology. You want to be able to look at an astrological chart, a horoscope, and understand what you're looking at. So I want to help you with that. That's bottom line. One of the biggest purposes of my life feels like it is to bring a simple, clear understanding of astrology to as many people as possible. So, first things first, I want to start with how do we learn? How do we learn? You know, we each learn in very different ways. And your learning is going to come through a combination of reading, listening, discussing with other people, writing, and most importantly, probably thinking and synthesizing what it is you are beginning to understand. Now, I've got many students that study with me monthly. I'm developing different programs of study for different types of learners and people who are in different places in their life and have different we all have various amounts of time that we're willing or able to put into a study, regardless of how passionate we might be about that study. So contact me if you want to talk more about deeper levels of study or if you have questions about my teaching or my teaching style. Now, through this program, I am going to be providing you with homework and writing practices, reading assignments, writing practices, and homework. The very first thing I want you to do, and the first required homework that I want from you, is an essay that really, I want you to go into some real thought process about what your journey has been so far with astrology. When did you first become aware of astrology? When did you first develop a more passionate interest in astrology? What astrology books you've read? Just kind of generally, what has your process been to date around this topic? The other part of this essay, I want you to tell me what you hope to gain in a deeper understanding of astrology itself or of your chart. Let me know, what is it you hope to gain through this study? I would like you to talk in this essay about how you imagine yourself using astrology in 5 years, in 10 years, in a year. How do you imagine yourself using this newly developing language? I'd like you to tell me a little bit about what you might know about your own learning style. I'd also like you to explain to me in your own words with what you know right now, how do you think astrology works? What's your understanding of how it works? Okay, simple. So add that in there. Another thing I'd like you to talk about is what you know about astrology now. What has it taught you about yourself? What have you learned about yourself through looking at your horoscope, or even understanding, what your sun sign is or what your moon sign is? What have you learned and how has that been helpful to you? Another thing I'd like you to talk about in this essay is, are there things in your chart that worry you or concern you, and why? There's plenty of information out there that can make us have kind of strange ideas and negative takes on different components in our own chart. So I'd like you to, talk about that. I would also like you to talk about what you know about your own chart, what you've seen about your own chart that excites you or makes you happy to see it in your chart. I would like you to tell me, do you enjoy reading? Do you enjoy studying? Do you enjoy writing? These are very important components for the study of astrology, clearly. Another thing, okay, so that's it for the essay. And you can write as much or as little as you want. You don't have to cover every single point on that. As much as you can would be great. I'd like you to, write that out and get that mailed to me. The next thing, I want to make sure, depending on where you are in what you've studied previously, make sure you have the symbols memorized. I want to know that when you see the symbols, you automatically know what each symbol refers to. Okay? Let's see. I'm going to, with this video, you will have some PDFs available that will show you the symbols. And there's a few other things that I wanted to go into, but I don't think I have what I need. Let's just set that aside. That'll be in the next video. Okay. Now the things that I want to talk about today, I want to, first of all, talk about the 4 branches of astrology. I realize there's a lot of information out there that people are confused about, so I want to cover a few things. Now, when I talk about the 4 branches of astrology, I'm talking about the 4 branches of Western astrology. When you start talking about Chinese astrology or Vedic astrology or Jyotish, and I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, astrology, that's not a branch of Western astrology. Those are totally different things. There are 4 branches of astrology, and I want to make sure that you understand these and you know what they are. First of all is natal astrology, which is basically what we're going to be talking about as you go through this study with me. We are working on Western natal astrology. Now, under the umbrella of natal astrology is anything that comes directly from a birth chart. So if we're talking about Synastry, which is the combining of 2 charts, or the looking at how 2 charts interact with each other. Synastry and composite is the bringing together 2 charts. Those are part of natal astrology. Anything that comes, if you're talking about transits and progressions and ways of looking at timing aspects around a person's chart, that's all natal astrology. Okay, so that's what natal astrology is. It's anything in Western astrology that comes from the perspective of a person's birth chart. Okay, now the next one is called electional astrology. And electional astrology is when an astrologer is trying to find an auspicious time to time an event. This comes from the idea that anything that we do has a time where it begins. So if you are going to get married or start a business, you want to find the best time available to begin that relation, that marriage or that business. You want a great time to begin it because that will be the birth chart of that marriage or that business or whatever it is that you're finding a good time for. So that's electional astrology. So what you're doing is you're looking for an election. All right. So we're not gonna be doing. I'm not going to be teaching a lot about electional astrology. It may come up in conversation, but if that's something that you're really interested in, I'm probably not your very best teacher. The next thing that, the next of the 4 branches of astrology is called Mundane Astrology. And that is, you know, Mundane Astrology is used a lot, or particularly in the past was used as a way of paying attention to the development of, you know, the passage of time and how it impacts countries and cultures. And really, I think of mundane astrology as watching the patterns of the movement of the planets in current time. So when I write my posts on my blog, that's really utilizing mundane astrology. So let's see, is there something else? I think weather patterns are also part of mundane astrology. So that gives you natal astrology, electional astrology, mundane astrology, and then the final one, which I love this. It's called horary astrology. And horary astrology is something that really fell out of favor for many generations and is sort of having a bit of a resurgence. Horary astrology is intriguing. It is really the branch of Western astrology that could be considered divination. When you see, you know, you used to hear about this stuff, you probably still do somewhere, you know, a child is missing and they bring in an astrologer to help find the child. They are using horary astrology. And the way horary astrology works is you ask a question. There has to be a direct question asked, like, where's the child? And the moment that the question is asked, the astrologer runs a chart for that moment. And the idea is that as above, so below, the moment the question is asked, the answer is in the pattern of the planetary bodies at that time. Oddly enough, interestingly enough, magically enough, it apparently works. I have not done a lot with horary astrology. I kind of poke at it once in a while because it is quite intriguing, but I haven't really had the time to study it. It has its own very specific rules. It's, you know, you're not going to understand horary astrology by studying natal astrology and then just pulling a chart and trying to figure it out. It has a whole different set of rules. So those are the 4 branches of astrology. Keep that in mind. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is just very simply the different parts, you know, in thinking about astrology, natal astrology, as a language. There are different parts of the alphabet that have to be learned and understood. Now, the main pieces of an astrological chart, of a horoscope, are the signs, the planets, the houses, and the aspects between the planets. Just to kind of cover this very briefly, the way I like to think about it, and I have to thank Stephen Forrest for this way that I think about it, is I think about the planets as our teachers. The planets are our teachers. The sign that those planets are in are the method of teaching that's used. The house that the planet falls in is the area where we get that teaching. And then the aspects between the planets are the conversations that those different teachers are having about us, okay, if we're looking at our own chart. So signs, planets, houses, aspects. I'm not bringing up a chart right here. I will in the next video, and we'll kind of go over that with a chart in front of us, but I just wanted to touch on that. Those are kind of the parts that we will be initially focusing on, learning about those parts, the signs, planets, houses, and aspects between the planets. The thing that comes after we fully understand a natal chart, also called a horoscope, is the methods of forecasting. And I want to take the word prediction out of there because we're forecasting, we're not predicting. Okay? There are so many choices that we do have in our lives that will modulate how an aspect, how a transit plays out, how the results of something happened. So there's no way I can look at someone's chart and say, oh my God, on July 28th, your husband's going to fall off the roof and break his leg. That's predicting. And that is not something that I know how to do, certainly. I could look at that same chart and say, you know, there seems to be a suggestion here that in the middle of the summer, there's going to be some challenges around your relationship that could impact a certain area of your life. So that's forecasting, and it's very, very different, okay? So there are different methods of forecasting that we use, and there are different methods that different astrologers utilize more and less than others. Transits are the most direct and kind of in real time literal, I would say. Transits are when we're talking about the planets out there moving around in current time and how they impact our natal chart. So, for instance, if Saturn is moving along out there and comes to the same position that the sun was in at the moment of your birth, you're going to have Saturn conjunct your sun. And that is going to be a time of great learning for you. All of the planets out there, as they are constantly going around the ecliptic, are going to be touching off different planets in our own chart and teaching us different lessons, depending on what the planet is in motion and depending on what planet it is touching in our own chart. That's a very simple explanation of transits. Solar arcs and secondary progressions are two different forms of forecasting that kind of take a longer view, and it is more of a symbolic way of looking at the chart. The changes that secondary progressions and solar arcs bring to us are, I tend to think of them as deeper. That's not a good, necessarily a good way to think about it, but it's more diffuse. It changes us on a deeper level. I guess I'll just leave it at that. They are two different forms of progressions. Secondary progressions and solar arcs are also a form of progressing the chart into time. If you stay with me and study long enough with me, we will touch on those as well. Transits are definitely the one that we would work on first. Okay, now, the next thing, if you stay with me long enough, we'll get into is relationship work. And there are, from the way I look at it, there are two ways that I look at and work with clients around relationship. One is called Synastry, and that is when you take one person A's chart, person B's chart, and you compare them. What are the aspects made between the planets in one person's chart and the planets in the other person's chart, and how does that relate? Does that help them in whatever piece of their relationship those planets represent? Is it helping their communication? Is it making their communication more difficult or challenging? Is it pushing them to make a particular area of their life a focus? So the synastry is really about comparing the two charts. What house does this person's sun fall in your chart? What house in their chart does your sun fall in? And so forth and so on. There's a lot of things that you can do to compare the two charts. So that's synastry. The other thing with relationship work, and this is really fascinating. It's called a composite chart. It's creating a composite chart. And what you do with a composite chart, well, how a composite chart is created is you've got person A's chart, you've got person B's chart. And what you do is you take the midpoint between each planet and create a new chart that is developed through the midpoints between all the planets in each person's chart. So what you have is a chart separate from that person's chart, separate from this person's chart. And I think of it as a chart of the relationship itself. You know, if you have ever been in a relationship for any length of time, you know that relationship kind of takes on a life of its own. It's not you, it's not the other person, it's this entity that you both have to relate with. Yes, we have to relate with our partner. We also have to relate with the relationship entity that our partner and I have created together. I really encourage people to work with their composite chart and give it a name. You know, because the relationship itself often has needs that neither one of the two individual people may have. So, you know, I kind of joke about it. I think it's really an awesome thing to give a name to the relationship. And then you can refer to it like, you know, I don't know, name your relationship Harvey. No, that's a bad name. Really, really bad name. Let's name the relationship Sally. I don't know. So let's name the relationship Sally. And in talking with our partner, we can think about it like, you know, I'd like to do this weekend. You'd like to do that this weekend. What does Sally need? What does Sally need? And then really thinking of it from that perspective, and you can follow the transits of the composite chart, and you can see what changes that relationship itself is going through, and work with it from that perspective. So that's another really powerful tool that we have in our arsenal here. So I wanted to touch on that. Now, I also want to just talk about the fact that for me, from my perspective, astrology has to be useful. It has to be useful. It has to be practical. It has to help us in our day-to-day life, not bring us out into some woo-woo place that isn't really of any value in our life. So it's really important to me that we find ways to make it useful. Now, anyone who is going to study with me, I really encourage. Obviously, I can't tell you what to do and what not to do, but I really encourage you to use the internet extremely sparingly when it comes to astrological research. There is so much information out there, and it is very, very difficult to separate what's good information from what's really harmful information or just totally irrelevant information. You know, there are websites, I've been to many websites where you don't even realize, especially if you're new to this study, you don't even realize that what you're looking at is not about Western astrology. It's about Vedic astrology or some other form of astrology that just is not appropriate if what your study is Western astrology. So I want to really encourage you to read books. You know, if you have a few favorite astrologers that you know are authentic astrologers, well-educated astrologers, articulate astrologers who are not looking at things from a negative perspective, sure, follow their blogs, read their blogs, but don't get lost in just researching for the sake of researching. Okay, so the next point, read books. We, as excuse me, I'm getting old here, and I know that to young people I probably sound a little crazy, but reading books is going to bring the information into your mind in a much deeper level, and it's going to hold it there in a much deeper level. Just how our minds take in information, please read books. Number one book I want you to get is Stephen Forrest, The Inner Sky. It's not a new book, but I love Stephen Forrest's poetic approach to the simple basics of astrology. And yeah, his book, The Inner Sky, it's a beautiful book. And you'll recognize, as you work with me, you'll recognize I have pieces of his information just embedded in my brain because I read that book hundreds of times. And I always recommend it to my students as the very first book to read. Another book that you might, if you want to get another book right away for early study, is The Essential Guide to Practical Astrology by April Elliott Kent. Is a very good book. Now, I want to really stress that it's very important that you begin right away building your astrology library. Right, back again, don't count on the internet. Get books that you can really, really delve into. Think about what it takes to write a book. People who have put out these really significant astrology books are not just writing a quick blog. They know on a very deep level this topic that they're writing about. Buy books. One place that's often an excellent resource is eBay. You know, people have huge libraries of astrology books, and then they get older, they move into a nursing home, their kids sell their books on eBay, and you can often get really great deals on 10, 20 books at a time, some of which might not be great for you, but some of which might end up being your most precious books. There's a lot of great astrology books that are no longer in print. Sometimes they will show up in that manner. So keep that in mind, but also just buy books. Start building your library. You are going to want it. Okay. Now let's see. I think, not sure how long I think I've been going over a half an hour here. So I think I might just leave it here for now. And I will be making a follow-up video for this very soon. But for now, here you go. Start reading those books. Start really thinking about this stuff. Write me your essay, and we'll go from there. Okay, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Ta-ta.